There's one thing that has been consistent in college football for what seems like a while, and that's Penn State not being able to win any of these big games. And you know what? I fell for it. I did. I thought I watched Penn State. I've watched every game they play. We talked about bringing Andy Kotelnicki over from Kansas, how this offense is different. Yet in the big moments of this game, and I think really throughout the game, we'll get to the goal line stand by Ohio State here in a little bit, where Tyler Warren didn't touch the ball, and you basically threw peanut butter and jelly at Ohio State's defense. I didn't think, David, I'll start with you, that Penn State's offense, the play calling was similar to what we had seen in the past. I mean, earlier in the year against USC, we saw all these different formations, all these different looks, throughout the season, even outside of that game, we saw them taking shots down the field, being aggressive. But it's just something about when they see that Ohio State logo or that Michigan State logo, it regresses back to the mean. It reverts back to the run and hide. I mean, neither team scored a touchdown in the second half, but Drew Aller, 12 of 20, 146 yards, didn't really take many shots down the field. I mean, he operated in a 15-yard box. Your leading rusher had 47 yards. It's funny, Katron Allen had 12 carries for 27 yards. Nicholas Singleton had 6 carries for 15 yards. Tyler Warren, the do-all-everything guy, had 3 carries for 47 yards. One of those was that big chunk play to get him down there. And then Drew Aller was your second leading rusher. And I want to give credit to Ohio State. But, David, am I wrong in saying I don't think either one of these teams played great yesterday?
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, I want to start with this. James Franklin is a very good football coach, and I think this Penn State team is still a good football team. And I know there's a lot of frustration right now for Penn State fans across the country, and there should be. But this is why the Buckeyes have been the standard in this conference for the first 2 decades of this century, and honestly for much of the last, because this is the movie we always see, and we saw it again. I understand the frustration for Penn State fans, and that should be there, because when you're the number 3 team in the country and you're at home and you have first and goal from inside the 5 2 different times and the offense can't score a point for the entire game, that to me is what I would describe as unacceptable. And we've talked about Andy Kotelnicki and the way that he's been, innovative and creative throughout the season. But to me, I'd rather just give the football to Tyler Warren 4 straight times, give the football to my best guy, and say, you know what, I can live and die based off what this guy is able to do inside the 5-yard line. But look, you have to give all credit to the Buckeyes. I still think Penn State's going to move forward and be a playoff team. And now winning a playoff game or performing well in the playoffs is even more imperative, I think, for James Franklin, because you don't get Michigan. You don't get a chance to beat up on them in a down year. You don't get Oregon, so you don't get a chance to make up for this loss to the Buckeyes at home. So you really need to make the playoff and do something while you're there. But look, all credit to the Buckeyes. They spotted Penn State 10 points and still can't win this football game. We talked about some of the struggles they had on both sides of the ball, especially rushing. Rushing the football wasn't good the past couple of weeks against Nebraska. And they rushed for 179 against this Penn State defense. And look, I thought the MVP of the game was Chip Kelly. It was the first time I'd seen the Buckeyes didn't just over personnel Penn State. It wasn't just big plays every single time down the field. It was Chip Kelly and his innovations in the run game and picking up some of those key third downs. I thought that's really what made the difference.
Blaine, and Code's 100% right. The first thing you do is you have to give credit to Ohio State. I thought what they did with that makeshift offensive line, Judkins ends up almost hitting the century mark, 14 carries, 95 yards. Henderson, 10 carries, 54 yards. That's over 5 yards a pop. Will Howard, 12 for 24, did have that fumble into the end zone, which that and the Penn State interception right before halftime, they kind of canceled each other out, right? Because Penn State should have scored there. Ohio State should have scored there. But when it comes down to creativity, I spent all week. I don't want to say y'all, but I spent all week talking about Andy Kotelnicki. And throughout his whole career, I've watched him do it. But it was Chip Kelly, right? You had the tight end delays. They did a really good job horizontally, whether it was with meshes, getting backs out on wheels, being able to get them on overs. But in order to hit those, you got to protect the passer. And I thought they did a pretty good job of that with an offensive line that there were concerns about. I mean, they were even talking about it during the game. But when Penn State went up 10-0, Blaine, it was almost like it put him into run and hide mode. Like, all right, guys, we got this. This game's over. Let's just run the ball, not take chances, and we're going to beat Ohio State. You can't do that. Yeah. When you get a chance to put a foot on the throat early, you got to kill them.
Well, let's act like we've been there before, and Penn State did not do that. And I want to bring up one point David brought up. I think James Franklin is a good coach. I don't think he's a very good coach. I don't think he's won anything that has made him a very good coach. And Penn State's always littered with talent. Always littered with talent. And sooner or later, look, 10-2 is great. Obviously, it is. Penn State's one of the top tier teams in the Big Ten. But the Penn State fans are sick of it. You're up 10 points. It doesn't get any better than this for James Franklin. You're at home. I know it's a big noon kickoff, which sucks. Everybody's hate. You go up 10 points. Will Howard is playing bad, and you still find a way to lose this football game. We can sit up here and talk about the offensive coordinator if we want to, and he did have a bad day, and Penn State's offense had a bad day. But sooner or later, okay, if I'm a Penn State fan and we have this talent walk through this team every year, and we can't win something that matters, sooner or later, you have to point to that guy as the head coach. Because, hell, I mean, let's say one thing I look at Mario Cristobal, right? Let's look at Miami last year. Find ways to blow games, all right? Find ways to blow game. And what is Miami doing this year? Hell, walking into fourth quarter down by points and finding to win games. Sooner or later, James Franklin has to change something to find a way to win the big game.
Well, I mean, do you think it's just a mentality thing? I mean, I think a lot of it was, and again, all due credit to Ohio State. They started leaning on Penn State in the second half, including when they closed out the game. And I know people will talk about the officiating. The officiating didn't lose you the game if you're a Penn State fan. If I'm a Penn State fan, I'm so sick of having to find excuses for why we lose this game. And then you go up 10 points. But moving forward, and Blaine, I agree with you. You know, it's there's something to be said for not losing the games that you shouldn't lose, right? Like that's an art form. A lot of coaches struggle with that. A lot of coaches will win big games, maybe games they're not supposed to, but then drop a game that they should win. James Franklin at Penn State has had one consistent problem. He can wipe everybody else in the Big Ten, and then they get rid of divisions, and you're like, oh, here we go. It's going to benefit Penn State more than anyone, and they're probably going to end up still going 11-1 or whatever it is. We'll see how it ends up and making the playoff. But how if I'm a Penn State fan, if you still can't beat Ohio State at home right now, what's going to happen in the playoff when you run up against a big dog and now you got to go out there and prove it? Is this a mental thing? Is there some sort of mental hurdle within the program permeated by James Franklin that they just can't do it? And then how do you get over that?
I mean, that's tough. You almost have to say there's a mental hurdle. I mean, you were up 10 points. You were up 10 points. You had your foot on the gas.
And it evaporated like that.
And it seemed like you just didn't know what to do because you've never been here before. All right? You didn't know how to act. And one thing I look at, and it's going to get talked about throughout college football, every show, you're on the goal line. Okay, and you bring that 71, that big offensive lineman 3 times, he touches nobody. You have Tyler Warren, who's the only reason you got down there. It just seems like James Franklin is somewhat clueless. In the moment, he is somewhat clueless. When he needs to do something important in a big pressure moment, he always does the opposite. And sooner or later, you can only chop your foot off so many times as a fan and then go back and try and play in the basketball court. It doesn't work like that, guys. If I'm a Penn State fan, it's the same thing what's going on in Ohio State. That game was huge for Ryan Day. Don't get it twisted. Huge road game. And now you're seeing the other side of what James Franklin's getting. He can't win the big game. And if I'm Penn State, I'm sick. I'm sick of just beating up on lower tier teams in the Big Ten. I want to win something important because you have the talent. Yeah. You matched up pretty well talent-wise and matchup-wise against Ohio State. The fact that Ohio State started leaning on you with a makeshift offensive line, it's so disrespectful to Penn State and the guys that they have up front. It's almost embarrassing to me. It really is.
Yeah. Well, I mean, David, and I want to ask you how good you think Ohio State really is, because, again, you lose to Oregon on the road by 1 point. You can make the case Oregon looks the best in the country right now. It seems they're only getting better. They dispatched Michigan pretty easily yesterday. But this Ohio State team, I think a lot of Ohio State fans will tell you, I don't know how much they trust Will Howard. I mean, you got people, Troy Smith saying at halftime Julian Sands should get in the game. But if I'm James Franklin and I'm the head coach, all right, at the end of the day, what I want, I'm going to get, right? I'm down at the goal line to bring up what Blaine's point is. Bring 71 in, that's fine. That's great. The fact that Tyler Warren did not touch the ball, or Drew Aller did not keep one of those reads when everybody that has ever rooted for Ohio State and played at Ohio State was attacking the running back. I'm getting on the headset after first down and saying, Tyler Warren is getting in the game and running the ball. If you don't like it, then you're fired. I don't know. Maybe I'm different. I know what Kirby would have done. I know what Nick would have said.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, as far as the Buckeyes go, I mean, yeah, I think they're good. Like in a year where, like, who has separated themselves as really good other than Oregon right now, and you lost to that team by 1 on the road. I mean, I'm watching Carson Beck throw 3 interceptions, and his draft stock drops every single game, and yet Georgia's still really good. So it's a weird year as far as the mental component. Maybe there is a mental component to what's going on at Penn State. I do just think some of the teams you're losing to are still really, really good. They're good teams and they're really great programs. When I think of James Franklin, I think of Mark Richt a lot. I think Mark Richt was a very good football coach. I think James Franklin, James Franklin and Mark Richt are better head football coaches than Ed Orgeron and Gene Chizik. And yet both of those guys were able to piece together one magical season where they get that one great player and a couple great pieces around them, and they go 15-0 and they win a national championship. And I'm sure Penn State fans would say, hey, we would trade that. We'd rather have one 15-0 national championship year rather than a full decade of winning 10 games, but we can't win the big ones. But at the same time, James Franklin is at least putting himself in a position to be able to do that. Another guy I think of is Jim Harbaugh. Just remember, guys, Michigan could have moved on for Jim Harbaugh after losing 6 or 7 straight in a row to the Buckeyes, and sort of had a similar problem, and losing to Michigan State and losing in bowl games. But hey, he was beating everyone else, right? Eventually he figured it out, and they did get that national championship. So which one is James Franklin going to be? Is he going to be like Mark Richt, who beat everybody except couldn't win those big games to win a national championship, and then Kirby Smart replaces him and wins 2 of them? Or is he going to be more like Jim Harbaugh, who has struggled against these big teams, figures it out, though, and is able to take Penn State to the mountaintop?
Yeah. Well, I mean, Penn State's the biggest tease in college football right now.